I never wanted to admit how deeply it cut me, but the truth is, my entire childhood was built on the sound of my brother's name echoing in my mother's voice, while mine dissolved into silence. It wasn't just favoritism. It was as if my existence carried less weight, like my footsteps barely pressed into the ground, while his every desire carved a permanent mark in the world we shared. I was the forgotten daughter, the one who grew up learning to swallow the ache of being invisible in her own home. I was born first. That's the irony of it all. I entered the world before him, a screaming little girl who held my mother's finger tightly, not knowing that finger would later point away from me again and again. But when my brother came 3 years later, it was as if my birth had been erased from her memory. Suddenly the house tilted toward him, all the light pooling where he sat, and I was left in the shadows. Whenever he needed something, my mother's hands were ready. She would stretch herself thin, cook his favorite meal, sacrifice her last coin for whatever new toy or tool he wanted. And me? When I whispered, "What about me?" she turned her face away, her eyes sliding past me as though my words carried no sound. I can still remember the sting of it, the way my chest would tighten, waiting for her to acknowledge me, waiting for even the smallest sign that I mattered. But there was nothing. That silence shaped me more than any harsh word could have. I'm a woman now, 34 years old. But when I close my eyes, I'm still that little girl, tugging on her mother's dress, begging for scraps of love. I built my life on that hunger. It made me strong, yes, but it also left me broken in places I still haven't learned to heal. People think betrayal comes in grand gestures, someone cheating, someone stealing, but the worst kind of betrayal is slow, subtle, and consistent. It's a wound reopened daily until you no longer remember what it felt like to be whole. Growing up, I tried everything to earn her affection. I excelled in school, hoping my grades would light a spark of pride in her eyes. They didn't. I helped around the house, cooking meals, folding laundry, cleaning until my fingers cracked, thinking maybe she'd notice the effort. She didn't. And when my brother misbehaved, when he broke things or shouted or came home late, she forgave him instantly. She said boys will be boys. But when I made even the smallest mistake, her anger was sharp, her disappointment heavy, as if my failures carried the weight of the entire family. I learned early on to hide my tears. Crying in front of her felt pointless, almost shameful, because tears never moved her. They only seemed to remind her that I wasn't strong enough, not like my brother, not like the son she adored. So I saved my crying for the nights when the house was quiet, when I pressed my face into my pillow and let the loneliness pour out of me. What hurts most is that I still loved her. Despite everything, I craved her approval, her tenderness. The mother I believed must exist somewhere beneath her coldness toward me. Love is cruel like that. It binds you even to the ones who hurt you, convincing you to keep reaching for something that may never come. As years passed, I built a wall around myself. To the outside world, I was confident, independent, determined. But inside, I carried that little girl's ache. It followed me into every relationship I had. I dated men who mirrored my mother's disregard, who treated me as an option rather than a priority, because that's what I was used to. I mistook neglect for normal, betrayal for love. I told myself I could handle it, that being needed, even in small ways, was enough. But deep down, I longed for someone, anyone, to look at me the way my mother looked at my brother, with unwavering devotion. One memory plays in my mind like a cool film reel. I must have been 15. My brother had broken his bike. The chain snapped after he rode recklessly down the steep hill near our house. He stormed into the kitchen, demanding that it be fixed. Without hesitation, my mother grabbed her purse, muttering about how she'd sell some jewelry if she had to, just to get him a new bike. I stood there, holding a sketchbook I had saved up for by skipping lunches for weeks. I wanted to show her my drawings, hoping she'd see I had talent, maybe even pride. But as she walked past me, clutching my brother's hand, she didn't even glance my way. The sketchbook trembled in my hands, and I felt invisible, erased. That day I learned my place was not beside her, but somewhere in the background, waiting for love that would never arrive. Time hardened me. I went to college on a scholarship, fighting tooth and nail for every opportunity, while my brother stayed home, drifting aimlessly, cushioned by my mother's endless support. She paid his bills, covered his debts, and when he failed, she shielded him from consequences. I, on the other hand, faced the world alone. But maybe that was the gift hidden in the cruelty. I became resilient, resourceful, capable of standing on my own feet. Still, resilience doesn't erase pain. It only teaches you to carry it without collapsing. The real fracture came when my father passed away. His death shattered what little balance remained in our family. I had always been closer to him, though even he, in quiet ways, reinforced my brother's place as the favored child. Still, he noticed me sometimes. He asked about my studies, told me he was proud. But when he died, it was as if the last thread connecting me to my family was cut. My mother sank deeper into her devotion to my brother, clinging to him as though he were the only piece of her husband left. I was pushed even further to the margins, the ghost of a daughter, haunting a home that had no room for her. I remember sitting at the kitchen table one evening, just weeks after the funeral. My mother was crying, her hands clutching my brother's as he promised to take care of her. I reached across the table, trying to comfort her too, but she pulled her hand away, her eyes fixed only on him. I whispered, "What about me?" The words barely left my lips before she stood and walked away, leaving me with nothing but the echo of my own voice. That was the night I decided I would leave. If I couldn't have her love, if my existence was to be denied in my own home, then I would build a life elsewhere. And I did. I carved out a career, a place for myself in the world, and I told myself I didn't need her. But the truth is, I carried her absence like a scar. No success, no accolade, no relationship could fill the hollow space where a mother's love should have been. The years blurred. My brother spiraled in and out of trouble, gambling, drinking, failed marriages. Each time, my mother came to his rescue, pouring what little she had into saving him. I watched from afar, both angry and unsurprised. It was the same cycle over and over, and she never saw through him. Or maybe she did and chose to ignore it. Either way, I remained on the outside, a daughter still asking, even silently, "What about me?" But life has a way of revealing truths when you least expect it. I thought my story was one of neglect and invisibility, but I had no idea there were deeper secrets buried in my family. Secrets that would turn betrayal into something sharper, something almost unthinkable. It began with a letter. I found it in an old box when I returned home one summer, years after I had left. My mother was ill by then, her health declining, though her eyes still shone with that same unwavering loyalty toward my brother. I had come only out of duty, not love. While cleaning out the attic, I stumbled across a dusty box filled with papers. Inside was a letter written in my father's handwriting, sealed and never sent. My hands trembled as I opened it. The words inside would unravel everything I thought I knew about my family, about why I had been cast aside, and why my brother had always been the center of my mother's world. The letter was dated the year I turned 10. The handwriting was unmistakably my father's, steady, sharp, every word deliberate. I held the fragile paper in my hands, my pulse racing as though I were prying into something forbidden. My father had always been a man of few words, but on those pages, he poured out a story I had never heard, one that would twist my understanding of everything. It wasn't addressed to me. It wasn't even addressed to my mother. It was addressed to a lawyer I had never met, someone whose name sounded foreign to my childhood memories. My father wrote of the truth and what she must never know. He spoke of a secret my mother had carried into their marriage, one that explained why my brother was the sun and I was a shadow. My hand shook as I read. My brother was not my father's child. He was the product of an affair my mother had before their wedding. A man whose name my father didn't even write, only hinted at with bitterness. My father confessed in the letter that he had chosen silence, not for her sake, but for mine. He didn't want me to grow up in a home divided by scandal. He thought keeping the secret would protect me, but instead, the silence had poisoned everything. I felt the air leave my lungs as the truth sank in. Suddenly, my entire childhood made sense. My mother's blind devotion, her desperate clinging, her endless sacrifices for my brother. It wasn't just favoritism. It was guilt. It was the weight of her sin, her need to atone by pouring every ounce of love into the son who was never my father's. And me? I was the reminder of her betrayal. I was living proof of the man she had married, but failed. I remember sinking to the attic floor, the dust rising around me, my body trembling. I wanted to scream, to tear the letter to shreds, to demand answers from a father who was no longer alive. How could he keep this from me? How could he leave me to suffer the sharp edge of her rejection without ever telling me why? And my mother, how could she look me in the eye all those years, hearing me beg for love and still deny me with such coldness? Rage coursed through me. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just hurt, I was furious. I wanted revenge, though I didn't yet know what that meant. All I knew was that something had been stolen from me. The right to know the truth, the right to understand why my life felt like a punishment. That night, I confronted my mother. She was lying in her bed, weak from illness, her breathing shallow. The years had not been kind to her, but her eyes were still sharp, still defensive. I sat beside her, clutching the letter like a weapon. I read it aloud, every word slicing through the silence. When I finished, she didn't deny it. She didn't cry. She only looked at me with a coldness that sent shivers down my spine. "Yes," she whispered. "He wasn't your father's child. And so what? He's mine. He needed me." Her voice cracked on that last word, but her eyes burned with defiance. I stared at her, waiting for an apology, for some recognition of the pain she had caused me. But none came. "What about me?" I asked again, the same question I had been asking since childhood. My voice was raw, trembling, a mixture of anger and desperation. She turned her head away, as if the wall was more deserving of her attention than her own daughter. "You were strong," she said flatly. "You didn't need me the way he did." I wanted to laugh at the absurdity of it. Strong? I was strong because she had given me no choice. I had been forced to grow around the hollow she left in me, forced to survive on scraps of affection. My strength was not a gift from her, it was a scar she carved into me. For days after, I couldn't sleep. The truth kept replaying in my mind. My father's silence, my mother's betrayal, my brother's place at the center of everything. I felt like a stranger in my own family, an orphan in a house that had never truly been mine. My brother, of course, knew nothing. He was in his 40s by then, still leaning on my mother's support, still blind to the sacrifices she had made for him. I thought about telling him, about shattering his illusion of who he was, but something stopped me. Maybe it was pity, or maybe it was the realization that revealing the truth wouldn't heal me. It would only spread the poison further. Still, I couldn't let it go. My life had been warped by this secret, and now that I knew, I couldn't pretend anymore. I found myself looking at my brother differently, with a mixture of anger and sorrow. He wasn't my enemy. He was just the symbol of everything I had lost. But the resentment I felt toward my mother deepened into something darker, something almost unbearable. Her health declined quickly after that. The illness consumed her, and soon she was too weak to speak more than a few words. I cared for her, out of duty, not love. I brought her meals, changed her sheets, sat beside her in the long, suffocating silences. Part of me wanted to walk away, to leave her to the consequences of her choices, but another part, the child, still begging for her love, stayed. One evening, as I wiped her forehead, she gripped my wrist with surprising strength. Her eyes locked onto mine, and for the first time, I saw fear there. Not guilt, not sorrow, but fear. Promise me, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Take care of him. Your brother. He's all I have. The words landed like a knife. Even on her deathbed, she chose him over me. Even as I held the evidence of her betrayal in my heart, she still asked me to sacrifice myself for him. I wanted to scream, to pull my hand away, to tell her no. But the little girl in me, the one who still longed for her approval, nodded. I lied to her because I knew it was the only way she would leave this world in peace. When she died, I felt nothing. No grief, no relief, just emptiness. People say losing a mother is like losing a piece of yourself. But I had lost her long ago. All that remained was the shell of a relationship that never truly existed. But death doesn't end betrayal. It amplifies it. After the funeral, my brother and I sat in the living room surrounded by boxes of her belongings. He cried openly, clutching her old shawl, while I sat stiff, the letter burning in my pocket. He talked about how much she had loved him, how much she had given him, how lost he felt without her. I listened, bitterness rising in my throat. He would never know the truth, never understand the cost of her devotion. As we sorted through her things, I found a small box tucked away in the back of her dresser. Inside were photographs, letters, and keepsakes from the man who had fathered my brother. His face stared up at me from a faded photograph, a stranger who had stolen my mother's loyalty before I was even born. I wanted to tear it apart, to burn it, but I didn't. I put it back in the box, closed the lid, and kept the secret to myself. In that moment, I realized my revenge wouldn't come from exposing the truth. It would come from reclaiming my life. My mother had spent hers chained to her guilt. My brother had lived under her shadow. But I had survived it all. My strength, my independence, my resilience, they were mine. They were the proof that her neglect hadn't destroyed me, no matter how much it scarred me. Still, the anger lingered. I wanted her to feel the weight of what she had done. But she was gone. The only person left to carry that burden was me. And maybe that was the cruelest twist of all. But life wasn't finished with me yet. The deeper secrets were still waiting, buried not in boxes or letters, but in the choices my brother would make after her death. And those choices would drag me into a storm I never saw coming, one that would test every ounce of strength I thought I had, and force me to confront not just my mother's betrayal, but my own capacity for vengeance. After my mother's death, I thought the worst was over. I believed I could finally breathe without the weight of her rejection pressing on my chest. But grief, guilt, and greed have a way of twisting people, and my brother's true colors began to show in ways that even I wasn't prepared for. It started small, subtle hints of entitlement, little comments about how he was the one who deserved more from her estate because he had sacrificed more of his life to be by her side. I bit my tongue, refusing to remind him that most of his so-called sacrifices were debts and failures my mother had cleaned up after. I didn't care about her possessions, not really. But then the lawyers called us in, and the truth about her will was revealed. She had left nearly everything to him, the house, the savings account, even the jewelry she had inherited from her own mother. To me, she left a small envelope, a pitiful collection of items that fit into one hand. The lawyer's voice droned on about fairness, about her wishes, but all I could hear was the echo of my own question. What about me? Even from the grave, my mother ignored me. I walked out of that office trembling, the envelope clutched in my fist. My brother stayed behind, smiling smugly, shaking hands with the lawyer as if he had won something he earned. Outside, I ripped the envelope open. Inside were a few old photographs, a locket with my father's picture, and a short note in my mother's handwriting. It read, "You were always stronger. That's why I gave him everything. He couldn't survive without me. You can survive without anyone." I wanted to scream. That was her final gift to me? A justification for a lifetime of neglect? Strength is not a prize when it comes from being starved of love. It is a wound disguised as resilience. I swore then that I wouldn't let her choices break me again. But my brother, he couldn't stop pressing the wound. He moved into the family home, turned it into his playground, and began selling off pieces of our history to pay for his gambling. He threw parties, wasted money, and paraded women through the house like it was some bachelor pad. Every time I visited, I felt the house shrinking, the memories of my father and childhood being stripped away. One evening, I returned to pick up some boxes I had left in the attic. When I walked into the living room, I found him arguing with a man I didn't recognize. The man's face was hard, his voice sharp, demanding repayment for debts my brother owed. My brother laughed it off, but I could see the tension in his jaw, the desperation in his eyes. When the man left, I confronted him. "You're drowning and you're taking everything with you," I said. He smirked, his words dripping with the same entitlement he had inherited from our mother. "Don't act like you care. You never did. You just want to see me fail so you can feel superior." I wanted to tell him the truth, that his entire life had been built on lies, that the woman he worshipped as a saint had betrayed us both in different ways, but I held back. Telling him wouldn't free me. It would only give him another excuse to spiral. So I left, carrying my boxes, carrying the secret, carrying the bitterness that was starting to consume me. Weeks turned into months, and his recklessness worsened. The calls started coming. Creditors, angry friends, even the police. Each time I reminded myself that he wasn't my responsibility. My mother had asked me to take care of him, but she had asked too much. She had asked me to sacrifice myself for the very person who had always taken from me, and yet I couldn't stay away. I told myself it was about protecting what little was left of our family legacy, but in truth, it was the pull of unfinished wounds. Part of me wanted him to finally see me, to acknowledge me as more than the sister in the shadows. The breaking point came one night when I received a call from a hospital. My brother had been in a fight, beaten nearly to death over debts he couldn't pay. I rushed there, heart pounding, though I hated myself for it. When I arrived, he was unconscious, bruised, and broken. Sitting by his bed, I felt a swirl of emotions: anger, sorrow, exhaustion. When he woke, his first words weren't gratitude. They were a plea. "Help me. You're all I have now." The words sliced through me. How many times had I wanted to hear that from my mother? "You're all I have." But now, spoken by him, it felt like another chain being fastened around my neck. He wanted me to become what she had been for him: a savior, a shield, a mother he never deserved. I shook my head, tears burning my eyes. "I can't save you," I whispered. But he clung to me, desperate. And in that moment, I made a choice. If I couldn't save him, maybe I could destroy the cycle. Maybe my revenge wasn't about punishing my mother anymore. It was about breaking free from the hold both of them had on me. I began to gather the pieces of his life, digging through the wreckage he had created. In doing so, I discovered more than I expected: hidden accounts, fraudulent schemes, lies that stretched further than I imagined. He wasn't just reckless, he was dangerous. He had borrowed money under my father's name, forged signatures, even stolen from distant relatives. My mother had shielded him from the truth of himself so completely that he had become a monster in denial. The realization hit me like a wave. My mother's betrayal had destroyed me in silence, but my brother's betrayal was loud, shameless, and devastating, and if I didn't stop him, he would drag me down too. So I made a plan. I documented everything: every forged paper, every debt, every lie. I spoke to lawyers, to people he had wronged, to those he had stolen from. Piece by piece, I built the case that would tear away the illusion he lived under. It wasn't just about justice. It was about reclaiming the part of myself that had been stolen by years of neglect.
The day it all came crashing down was almost cinematic. He was hosting one of his reckless parties, the house filled with laughter, music, and the stench of cheap alcohol. I walked in quietly, carrying the folder that held his downfall. People looked at me curiously. I was the sister, the one who never belonged in his world. I found him, in the center of it all, holding court like a king with no kingdom. When he saw me, he grinned. "Sister!" Finally decided to join the fun. I handed. Confused, he flipped through the papers. His smile faded, replaced by panic. The room seemed to close in as his lies unfolded before him, laid bare in front of everyone he thought admired him. Whispers spread, faces turned, and in that moment, his empire of deceit crumbled. He looked up at me, eyes wide with betrayal, as if I had been the one to wrong him. "Why?" he croaked. I held his gaze, my voice calm, almost cold. "Because I won't be invisible anymore. Not for you, not for her, not for anyone." The silence that followed was deafening. For the first time in my life, I felt the power shift. I wasn't the forgotten daughter anymore. I wasn't the shadow. I was the one who ended the cycle. But power comes with a price. And as the night ended with police at the door, as my brother was led away in handcuffs, I felt a hollow ache settle inside me. Revenge doesn't heal wounds. It only proves they exist. And yet, as I stood in that empty house, the echoes of my childhood fading into silence, I knew one thing. I had finally answered my own question. What about me? This was about me. My survival, my story, my voice. But the final twist was still waiting for me, hidden in the very items my mother had left behind. The locket, the photographs, the pieces I had almost dismissed. And what they revealed would force me to face not just betrayal, but the truth about myself. The house was empty after they took him away. The music, the laughter, the chaos he had created, it all dissolved into silence. For the first time, I stood in those walls without my brother's presence, without my mother's shadow, without the weight of their expectations crushing me. And yet, the silence wasn't peace. It was heavy, almost suffocating, pressing me to confront the things I had avoided even as I tore his world apart. I returned to the small envelope my mother had left me, the one I had dismissed as pathetic compared to everything she had given him. The locket was still there, cool against my palm. I had never opened it before, but that night, something in me needed to. With trembling hands, I pressed the clasp and watched it open. Inside, instead of just my father's picture, there was another photograph folded tightly behind it. I pulled it out, unfolded the worn paper, and froze. It was a picture of me as a baby. Only I wasn't in my mother's arms. I was in the arms of a woman I didn't recognize, a stranger. Her face soft, her smile radiant, her eyes holding me with a tenderness I had never felt from my mother. On the back, in faded ink, were the words, "Her name is Lily. She deserves to know one day." My breath caught in my throat. Who was this woman? My father's handwriting again, unmistakable. My hands shook as I pieced together the truth. The affair, the betrayal, it wasn't just my mother's story. My father had secrets too. The woman in the photograph wasn't just anyone, she was connected to me. I searched the envelope again and found another slip of paper tucked deep inside. This one was a letter, shorter than the one I had found in the attic. In it, my father admitted what I had never even suspected. He had loved another woman once, long before I was born, and though their relationship had ended, he never let go of her memory. He hinted that she had come back into his life briefly, around the time I was born. The words were fragmented, unclear, but enough to plant a seed of doubt so powerful, it made my knees buckle. Was I even my mother's child? I stared at the photograph again, at the way that stranger held me, the joy on her face. It was the kind of love I had always longed for. Could it be that the reason my mother resented me so much was not only because of her own betrayal,
but because I wasn't truly hers at all? The possibility sank into me like poison and relief all at once. I spent weeks searching, chasing scraps of information, reaching out to anyone who might know. Old family friends, distant relatives, even the lawyer whose name had been on that first letter. Piece by piece, the puzzle came together. The woman in the photograph had died years ago, but not before leaving behind her own letter. A letter that confirmed what I feared, and what, deep down, I had always suspected. I wasn't my mother's daughter by blood. She had taken me in, claimed me as her own, but I wasn't hers. I was the living reminder not only of her betrayal, but also of my father's. We had all been living inside a web of secrets so tangled it had strangled every ounce of love out of our family. The revelation was both devastating and liberating. Devastating because it meant my entire life had been built on lies. Liberating because it finally explained everything. Her coldness, her silence, her refusal to see me. It hadn't been about my strength at all. It had been about her shame. Every time she looked at me, she saw not a daughter, but a mirror reflecting back her failures. I wept for days. Not for her, not even for my brother, but for the child I had been. The child who had begged for love from someone incapable of giving it. That little girl had deserved better. She had deserved honesty. She had deserved to be held the way the woman in that photograph held her. But grief eventually gave way to clarity. I realized I couldn't change the past. I couldn't rewrite my mother's choices, my father's betrayals, or my brother's downfall. What I could do was choose what came next. For the first time, I felt the weight of revenge lift from my shoulders. My vengeance against my brother, my bitterness toward my mother. It had given me a temporary sense of power, but it hadn't healed me. What healed me was understanding. Knowing the truth, even though it was painful, was the only thing that allowed me to finally let go. I sold the house. I couldn't keep living inside those walls, surrounded by ghosts and lies. With the money, I didn't pay off my brother's debts. I didn't save him, just as I had promised myself. Instead, I built something new. A life that was mine, untouched by the shadows of their choices. My brother eventually called me from prison. His voice was broken, desperate. He begged me for help, for forgiveness, for family. For the first time, I didn't feel the ache of invisibility when he said my name. I didn't feel the old pull to fix what wasn't mine to fix. I listened in silence, and when he was done, I said the words I had waited my whole life to say. What about me? There was no answer, just silence on the other end of the line. And in that silence, I found my freedom. Years have passed since then. I've built a life where I am no longer the shadow, no longer the forgotten daughter. I've learned that sometimes family isn't defined by blood or obligation, but by choice, and I've chosen myself. I've chosen to give the love I once begged for to the person who needed it most, me. Looking back, I see now that betrayal and secrets can destroy, but they can also reveal. They can strip away the illusions we cling to and force us to confront the truth of who we are. My mother's rejection, my father's silence, my brother's selfishness. They hurt me, scarred me, nearly broke me. But they also pushed me to find my own strength, my own voice, my own worth. If you've ever felt invisible, if you've ever begged for love that never came, if you've ever asked, "What about me?" I want you to know you are not alone. Sometimes the people who should love us most are the ones who fail us, but their failure doesn't define us. Our survival does. Our choice to rise anyway does. And that's what I've done. I've risen, not because they gave me love, but because I learned to give it to myself. So this is my story. A story of betrayal, of secrets, of revenge and pain, but also a story of survival, of clarity, of finding light in the places where darkness once lived. And if you take anything from it, let it be this. You matter.
Even if they don't see you, even if they ignore you, even if they break you, you matter. Thank you for listening to my story. If it touched you in any way, I'd love for you to like this video, share it with someone who might need it, and subscribe so you can join me for more stories like this. And please, leave a comment below. I want to hear your story too, because no one deserves to feel invisible.